Hello and good evening. My name is Sam Dobbin. I was speaking tonight about the time that I spent during this half semester, specifically taking the secondary literacy course, what I have learned, and what I have done. I'll be talking specifically about the Michigan State standards in teaching, the learning objectives given to me by my school, how I implemented both of these things into my lectures and classwork during my time teaching. I will then go on to talk about my assessments and how I judged what the students were learning, and finally, my own reflections on how I did and what I could possibly do better in the future. So, first is the state standards as prescribed by the state of Michigan. There's a number of them. The ones that I taught in particular was Challenges to an Emerging Nation, specifically establishing America's place in the world, and Coming of the Civil War, comparing the differences between the economic, social, and cultural traits of the North and South. Both of these objectives have been pointing out here on the left. This PowerPoint is included with my submission if you'd like to take a closer look at it in more depth. Moving on. The specific learning objectives given to me by the school fit very closely in with the state learning standards. There is a number of them given to us throughout the semester for the past 4 weeks. Specifically, we have been talking about comparing and contrasting, and then cause and effect. On the left here is the pacing guide given to the teachers. And it outlines not only our objectives, but also the standards by the state and the specific lessons in the books that we are supposed to be following. This is an excerpt from one of the lessons that I taught personally, dealing with cause and effect, specifically the War of 1812. This relates to establishing America's place in the world, objective standard, and the cause and effect learning objective prescribed by the school. This right here is one slide out of a interactive pear-decked presentation that I gave the class. Where students were instructed to give an individual response and then consult with a peer to see if they came up with a similar response. If they came up with different things, they were asked to come to an understanding before sharing with the class at large. Up here is the student task, which is the main question for all students to answer. And below it is the deep dive, which was meant to challenge students who may be on a slightly higher level and encourage them to interact and challenge themselves even more and dive deeper into the subject. Both questions had to do with a link to a article that I found dealing with the War of 1812 and impressment of U.S. sailors. The objective was for the students to pull data and information from the source and form their own conclusion using that data. The second learning standard was comparing and contrasting, specifically the North and South in the years leading up to the Civil War. The state standard itself was comparing and contrasting the North and Southern traits, and the learning objective was, again, being able to compare and contrast Northern and Southern states. So it fit very, very closely with what was being taught in the book. The lesson itself was a Venn diagram while reading chapter 17, which dealt with Northern and Southern traits leading up to the Civil War. Students were asked to fill out a Venn diagram with one side being Northern traits, one side being Southern, and then the middle obviously being similarities between the two as the students found them. Assessments. There were a number of tools used by myself and my co-teacher, Mr. Giddings. The main ones being Blooket and Kahoot, both of them online interactive review tools. We use this as an informal and fun assessment, often used in the last 10 minutes of class as we had a little extra time, as a informal assessment to see what they pulled from the lesson or from what they pulled from the week. After that, we gave a series of Google Forms. Mr. Giddings prescribed them as exit tickets, with the implication that the students were supposed to fill them out and answer them before they left class, most of them dealing with what was taught directly on that day. Finally, we have the unit test / FA. This is the standard summative assessment that we give the students to determine what they have pulled from the unit. And we are supposed to give 5 of them throughout the semester. Data collected. For Blooket and Kahoot, data is collected from the students regarding participation and correct answers. Unfortunately, because I am not the one who wrote them and I did not host the session, I personally do not have access to that data to provide. However, in going over the data informally with Mr. Giddings during our prep periods, I can recall that the average correct answers usually hovered around 50% or lower in some cases. And unfortunately, participation in these Kahoot challenges usually hovered around the 30% mark, roughly a third of the class, which we tried to combat that numerous times throughout these 4 weeks, and unfortunately had mixed results at best. The Google Forms, I myself only assigned 1 Google Form, having to do with my very first lesson taught. Out of the 83 students between our 3 class periods, I only had about 25 turned in to date, about half of that being late, which again is hovering around the 1/3 mark of participation, which is disappointing. And of those 25, only a handful of them did the work properly as asked, which again was very disappointing to see. Finally, the Unit 2 test / FA. Unfortunately, that test is being given on Tuesday. Therefore, I do not have any data associated with any summative assessments, as to date we have not given any, which is unfortunate. Reflections. Coming into this classroom environment, my standards I do not believe were exceptionally or unusually high. I've already had some experience in this demographic and in the public school system in the area, so my expectations were somewhat dampered. Even so, I was surprised by the lack of participation and apparent caring by the student body when it came to everyday work and assessments and assignments and homework. Part of this, I believe, has to do with my own inexperience, especially with the Google form. In hindsight, I do not think that my wording in the Google form was particular or concise enough. I've since learned that if I am wanting a particular answer, or if I'm wanting an answer to be in depth, I need to specify that, because the chances of these students going above and beyond or doing their own research when they don't understand for these students seems to be unrealistic. And so if I am wanting a certain standard in their answers and in their work, I need to be very particular in expressing that standard. Otherwise, it will not, and I cannot expect it to be followed. Aside from that, though, the other half of the equation is that at this school, because of their own curriculums, classwork and homework only accounts for 10% of the student's grade, a fact that they are very aware of. So the mindset that a lot of students have taken is that doing classwork and homework is not worth their time because it is only 10% of their grade. And they are banking on the fact that even if they don't do the homework, they will be able to pass the test, which remains to be seen if they are correct. My assumption is that they are not. So bearing that in mind, I need to develop some strategies in order to express to them the importance of them doing this everyday work. As of yet, I have not found the silver bullet, so to speak, that will fix this issue, but I am still researching strategies and trying to figure out a solution. Hopefully that solution will be forthcoming. But that concludes my presentation and what I have learned. I believe that I've learned a fair lot, both in the class and in the experience gained, and in both instances, I'm very grateful for what I have learned over these past few weeks.